Guys, I want to welcome you to another episode of the Advisory Board franchise or the Advisory Board podcast. I don't know, I can't say that right. I've got with me Jeff Bevis today, and I want to tell you why I've got him here. So, first of all, if you don't know him, a lot of you do because he's been in the industry for in franchising for 31 years. His parents, he's like second generation more or less. His parents owned a Remax, so he's kind of had it in his blood. So he and his a couple of things. He's the COO of Caring Service. Wait, let me say it right. Caring Senior Service franchise, and this is the second time he's been in not even that. You've been in the home care, home service, or home care industry for like 19 years. Am I right?
19 years, yes.
Yeah, a few things you might not know about Jeff. Lives in San Antonio. Played college basketball. Who'd you play for, Jeff? By the way,
just a small Division III school, Capital University in Columbus, Ohio.
That's okay though. It got you moving around the country and playing some ball. That's awesome.
That's right.
And Jeff's also got how many kids? I know Devin, but
2 children and 6 grandchildren.
Yeah, and you smile more when you say the grandchildren, Jeff. Why is
that? But those are your pride and joy. You get to spoil the heck out of them and just give them back.
Yeah. Well, I sure am grateful to have you. Jeff's an expert in operations, guys. I mean, he's been doing this for a long time. Length of tenure doesn't always mean expertise, but as we were chatting and preparing for this before, and I think you're going to enjoy a lot of the comments that Jeff's going to share with you and some guidance. But Jeff, before I butcher anything else, since I seem to be struggling this morning, tell us a little bit more about yourself and about what you do.
Well, I appreciate being here, Dave. I'm currently the COO of Caring Senior Service. We're a non-medical in-home care franchise. We're the only tablet-based brand in the U.S. today across the entire home care industry. Very proud of our technology platform, kind of high-tech, high-touch. Mm-hmm. I've been in franchising for 37 years, 7 different brands, 5 different industries. Can't say that I've seen everything, but I've seen probably most of the different conditions, the highs and lows, and really enjoy working with entrepreneurs and with other emerging brands to try to help them be successful too.
Yeah, well, this is cool, and it's a family affair for you guys because you mentioned to me before, Devin, one of your children. Yes. He worked with you in a previous brand which you exited. Now he just recently came on board with Caring Senior Service.
Yes, Devin and I built another brand from scratch for 10 years, very successfully in the home care space, and now he's our new director of marketing at Caring Senior Service. So really excited to team back up with Devin and have some great success here at Caring.
That's fun. Well, let's talk about the topic. So a lot of brands really struggle with operations. And I mean like every aspect of operations, staffing or technology. But there are a few areas where everybody universally needs to have a plan and a process, or else they're going to really struggle. And we identified those beforehand as support, metrics, and communications. So what we're going to talk about today, guys, is how do you break that down, those areas down into really functional plans, or how do you make sure you've got a plan in place so you can address those key areas of operational inefficiency that typically exist in franchises? And I've got the right guy here with me today to make sure we do that. So Jeff, let's start. One, you've been in this industry for a long time, several different franchising categories, concepts, things like that. What would you say, why these 3 areas? Why support, metrics, and communication? What have you been seeing in your career that makes you think that these are the most important areas of operations to narrow down to in this discussion?
Well, over my entire career, Dave, I would say those 3 don't waver based on the sector or the industry or the brand. If you have really strong communications with franchise owners, and then certainly have solid metrics that you and the individual franchisees are measuring and then sharing, then obviously have really a key devotion to support. Those are kind of the 3 cornerstones, I think, that would build a brand very successfully and usually very, very rapidly too.
Yeah, agreed. And I think we should break them down because that's definitely not the end. That's just the intro of the topic here.
Yeah.
Let's talk about support. And I'll just share some insights because we're a sales automation platform. We work with tons of organizations across every sector, several people, as I mentioned, in your sector, and we see a lot of struggles with supporting franchise success. So tell me, first, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see when people are trying to build support infrastructure and support operations?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of times we emerge as a brand and we think we have a solid base, and we probably do from our first corporate operation, our first couple corporate operations. But the support that you give to a franchise owner, of course, is different than the support you would have in your own corporate operation. So um, I think first and foremost, you go into it with we're going to do whatever it takes approach and support the franchisee, no matter how high they get or how low they get, to help keep them on that treadmill or kind of on that wheel, moving forward and moving higher in their hours or their product or their service results overall. I feel like over the years, I've also seen a lot of franchisors, emerging brands, Dave, that go into it and kind of cut corners on the support side, especially early on, because you and I would probably both agree, it's not magical. When you have to really get in, it's roll up your sleeves, build that support base, do whatever it takes to help those, especially those first 10, 20, 40, 50 franchisees be not only successful, but wildly successful, because that's going to be the health of your brand and obviously owner validation. That's going to go a long, long way. So the support aspect, I think, has to be operationally sound. It has to be well documented. You have to be able to teach it, educate the franchisees, and help them educate their staff to be consistent in the overall delivery, but then also just be able to see the success and help them track it as well.
Yeah, well, and let's talk about that, because you mentioned just a few minutes ago that a lot of emerging brands, growing brands, even established brands, they start to cut corners in the support process. I mean, what does that look like? I mean, and for those listening, because there might be some guilty parties listening in, but some of them might not even be aware that they're cutting a corner. Some of them might be thinking, "Hey, we're being super efficient here," and yet it's actually a corner being cut that's going to bite them in the butt. So. Actually, that rhymed pretty well. We might have to coin that later. Anyway, so Jeff, what are some of those key areas where you see corner cutting happening in this support process? And then let's talk about how to undo that, unravel it.
Yeah, I think a lot of times emerging brands, Dave, will over focus too much on the budget side of things. And not that you should spend like crazy, but I see folks cut corners where they say, hey, my first 40, 50, 60 units, I'm going to do support over the phone, or I'm going to have a once a year annual conference, or I'm going to have maybe a quarterly town hall call. You can't do it with just that little bit of support or interaction or contact. You've got to go all in, like I was mentioning before. But that's not saying you've got to be out there and visit every owner every month, but I see people cut corners where they're trying to kind of skimp or get by on minimal support. And that is just the exact opposite of where I've seen successful brands really go, and why they've been successful, because they committed to support. They had the town hall calls, but they had them maybe monthly or more often. They had weekly phone coaching. They do still make on-site visits. And then even, once you get to 50, 60 units and you have maybe a dedicated support person, whether that's a business coach or however we want to title him or her, then you have kind of that next level of support where you're really able to truly deliver on providing direction, guidance, and support to your franchisees.
Yeah, and you just opened up Pandora's box. So let's go into this a little bit, because I think a lot of franchise brands say, "Well, I don't have enough." It's not just money. As they're selling units, they have a cash influx that needs to be reinvested back in the business. And this is where I see a lot of them struggle. They've invested heavily in like some sort of an FSO relationship, where essentially every unit they sell, they have zero cash coming into the business to build the infrastructure to support the people that they need. So, and nothing wrong with FSOs, but I mean, just you got to be aware, eyes wide open, guys. You're gonna have to probably take out a loan to get the staff to pay that bill if you're working with an FSO, so you can have the proper support infrastructure. And if you do it, then the net gain here is you're going to get you're going to have a royalty independent business where you're not dependent upon the cash influx of the sale of franchises. I knew a unit or a franchise system that had 200 and something units, and if they didn't sell enough units, they would not be able to pay their bills every month. I mean, that is not a healthy business model. So
No,
sure, you got to be royalty independent. That's easier said than done, but and maybe in some small manner FSOs help with that because you have to learn how to be royalty independent or bust. But it's about investing in the people. and
yes.
you mentioned weekly coaching, on-site visits, getting in the field with the folks. And there was one more thing you mentioned that was kind of a key part of that. What was that? Do you remember what it was? I didn't type that down.
Well, if you have the town hall calls, the on-site visits,
Mhm.
the telephone coaching, and then just have conferences too, the ongoing
Yeah.
training. And with virtual anymore, whether it be Zoom or WebEx or Google Meet or Teams, we've got a lot of ways to really be almost there, at
Mhm.
least face to
Yeah.
face, and really provide added support.
Yeah, I think so too. And we will get nerdy about tech, but I think as the technology for virtualization and AR kind of develops, I think actually being in field could become a lot more manageable and cost effective and also reasonable experience. Like right now, getting into a dumb like VR world with your avatars and talking, you might as well do a Zoom. But like I think with the AR, like anyway, we can skip the nerd herd discussion. But I think that
Yeah,
actually might become more manageable. Give it 2 or 3 years to develop, but I think Apple's working on some things like that. Meta sure is, Facebook
oh,
sure is, but
sure.
that's
Yeah,
the Oculus experience of being locked into a little chamber is going to change, I think, soon. So
sure.
anyway,
You make
but
a
go
you
ahead.
make a good point though, Dave, about FSOs because not say that they're not appropriate. They certainly have their place and can be very, very helpful in a growing emerging brand. But I think to what we're both saying too, I use the term royalty self-sufficiency.
Yeah.
And over the years, I think that should be what we should all be searching for, striving for as a new emerging brand, and make sure we know exactly where that number or where that tipping point is. You can use franchise sales organizations to bring new candidates, new owners in. But then if you do that, then I'd really double down on the support side operationally, so that yes, if they're bringing new ones in for you, they're kind of your outsourced franchise development team. Obviously, you're really making it work on the ops side, so that you have high success, very little failure, if
Mhm.
if even any failure at all.
Yeah, I agree. And you brought up something that nobody wants to talk about, but I think we should talk about it more, which is field visits, being on
Yes,
site with people. That's expensive, and it's expensive in personnel as well as in travel and expenses. More so on the former than the latter. When you're small and emerging, it's like, well, who goes? Me or my wife, right? Like some of these brands, it's really just a 2, 3
that's
person
right.
team. And if you haven't properly separated yourself from operating your corporate stores, you'll never be able to do this. And
Very,
so,
very true.
yeah, so I think, as an emerging brand, building that infrastructure to make sure you can completely separate and truly be a franchisor and leave this, the core operations of your 1, 2, 3 corporate locations to a capable general manager.
Mhm.
If you're not doing that yet, I think that's probably got to be a step one. How do you feel about that, Jeff?
Sure. I think you mentioned a very capable general manager, Dave. That to me can be a key person in doing those field support visits. So if initially it's you and your wife and one other employee, and you have this very capable GM doing the management of the corporate location, you can incorporate he or she in those field visits too. I mean, they've got great ops experience. They're running your corporate location or locations plural. Have them in the mix and be able to take some of that burden off of you or your wife or that other employee. But absolutely get out in the field, make those field support visits. Don't let it just go on autopilot or rely on phone or rely on um, video visits, even as much as we've said before, those can be great tools. The emerging brands that succeed and get to 100 units plus, I think really make a commitment to being there in person. Yes, it'll be tough timing wise. Yes, you feel like, gosh, I don't have enough hours in the day. I'm working 70, 80 hours, 90 hours a week, my first
Yeah.
couple of years anyway. That's just the nature of the beast, that what you have to do. There's no shortcut there.
Yeah, yeah. I know a couple of guys that are hustling right now. that are building new brands, and that's their life, and they know it.
Yeah,
And people
yeah,
advise them, look, your first 2-3 years, you're going to be doing 60 to 80 hours a week minimum, and then you get big enough you can have the right staff in place where you don't have to, but you kind of have
right,
to
right.
put the hustle in or it doesn't work.
Yes, I
How
agree.
frequently, Jeff, would you recommend? It probably varies by concept, but how frequently should the franchisor be in field with their franchise brands to truly stay in tune with them, give them the right coaching they need, etc.? And maybe we break it down by stage as well, because in their life cycle, being a new franchisee, I'm guessing in the first year, there's a magic number you found over the years that you probably better be with them X number of times. Do you mind sharing some insights into that?
Sure, sure. And I think it definitely does vary, Dave, based on how long they've been in business and maybe even size or scale. So what I mean by that is I think in the first year to 16, 18 months, you should make at least 3 in-market visits.
Okay.
Now, I know contractually, a lot of us in the franchise agreement don't want to commit to even 1 visit a year. I think it takes guts, but also it's visionary to in your franchise agreement show that candidate, that new owner, that you're going to be there twice in the first year, or twice a year total. Once that business starts to scale, year 2, 3, then I think that support frequency changes a little bit. But it also kind of can intensify if the business is taking off and growing steadily. We think we would both agree the type of support you're delivering in the first year at low revenues versus the type of support you deliver in year 3, 4, 5, 6 at higher revenues. That takes a different approach. You want to document. I think it's always important to ask the franchisee before you make a visit, what are the key challenges? I mean, hopefully you've been talking to he or she and you know what they're really up against, but you want to give them a chance to have input on the shape of your visit, whether it's for 1 day or 2 or 3 days, and then do a recap back to what you committed to, what they committed to, so it can be kind of a roadmap to follow from first visit to the second visit to third visit and so
Yeah.
on.
I love what you're describing there, having kind of a process where, excuse me, not only do you do the visit, but also you document beforehand what the focus of the visit is. Because just showing up and doing visits, I mean, I know some franchise brands that have great relationships with their franchisees and have not coached them. And so it's really more of like hey, let's go grab dinner. Hey, let's look at your books for a minute. Hey, and it's really like a hey buddy visit.
Yeah.
Well, you get that visit from anybody. That's not what they're paying you royalties for, right? They're paying you royalties because you're supposed to help them implement your business model and find success in their market with it. And so having that focus before you show up is critical. And I honestly think, I don't want to move off from this topic yet, but this is where metrics come into play. As a franchisor, if you don't have the right metrics, you have no idea what their problem is. If you got the right metrics, you know exactly what their problem is, and they might not even know it because they don't know how to interpret the numbers. So we'll come back to metrics in a minute. But but as it's related to this, how do you use metrics to determine what you should be focusing on in your site visits?
Yeah, I think that's a key part of what you're trying to coach or train the owner to utilize, or just even recognize and then utilize too. So that's one of the benefits, Dave, of doing like a pre-visit letter in advance, where you're asking them the key topics they want to cover with you, but then you're also listing, say, your top 3 or 4 or 5 metrics, whether they're doing well so far or not, that you want to get them acclimated and start educating and paying attention to. Hey, here's the 3, 4, 5 things that are most important, and that's what we're going to really focus on from my standpoint while I'm there. Also looking at the 3 or 4 key topics, priorities that you, Mr. or Ms. franchise owner, have too. And to your earlier point, I think you owe the franchisee to give this kind of outside in view, because they're immersed in the business day to day. The last thing you want to do is come in there and be able to tell them, oh yeah, everything's fine, and kind of sugarcoat things. And if it's not, that's what they're counting on you as the franchisor to really tell them. And in fairness, I think that's what we owe them, is the reality of, hey, this is working great, you're doing well here, let's talk about this other area because things are not working well there. We need to make sure you're on track using the process, using the system and not letting them get off the reservation too far.
And in the back of my mind, I hear some of my friends in the legal side of franchising, Spadia, Lignana, Cohen, or Fisher, like I hear them whispering, there's also another benefit to what you're describing, right? This
Yes.
creating a visit letter, creating a recap letter, which is also you're proving the value of what you're doing as a franchisor, and that there's no negligence in your relationship with the franchisee. I mean, I don't want to riff on this too long because I hate this aspect of it, but we also have to play the CYA game a little bit.
Yes.
It should not be the motivation for this, but I'm saying as an added benefit of doing it right. How have you
Correct.
seen it protect franchises who are doing it well?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Dave. And I don't really consider myself being a risk averse person, but I think risk is always important for the franchisor, that you got to be mindful of documenting visits, documenting communications, making sure that if that worst case scenario came out later, where the franchise owner says they never visited, they never called me, they never gave me any guidance, never gave me any training, you've got your ducks in a row and your documentation there. It doesn't have to be immense or in the attorney's words. It could just be in your words or your operational manager's words, so that you can back up and show all the efforts that you've actually made and invested in the franchise owner. You're right.
Yeah. Then one other note on legal stuff, especially to the emerging brands, this is also why you need to actually pay it. Rather than just trust that the attorney did you a favor, you need to read through every single clause that they're putting in the franchise agreement and making sure what have you got to execute on, what do you not. You almost want to make a separate document that shows, okay, here's my matrix of my commitments to my franchisees, matrix of commitments from my franchisees to me, and then you can hold yourself accountable to your matrix to make sure, okay, I've committed to an annual on-site visit. If you don't do them to save budget, but it's in your agreement, guess what? You're going to lose that battle every day in court, because you've got a firm commitment. That's negligence, right? You're not fulfilling on a term. It's a breach. So you got to be cautious of what you commit to up front. So read that agreement, make sure you feel comfortable executing on it, and if you don't, then don't do it. That's why I think most attorneys are going to advise you not to make those commitments in your franchise agreement. But at the same time, if you make them, stick with them.
Yeah, and just maybe to dwell on that one more comment too, Dave, because I think you're spot on. I would kind of flip it, and that becomes kind of a franchise development tool, because franchise candidates, by and large, don't hear from us as franchisors. Here's the key highlights in the franchise agreement, or here's the key highlights in a 200-page FDD document. Here's what we're committing. Here's the commitments we're making to you. Here's what we're expecting, or your commitments to make to us. If you can boil things down to those kind of key points, franchisor to franchisee and franchisee back to franchisor, I think you'll stand out too, and be very transparent and open, and probably build trust faster with the candidate or the new owner as well.
Yeah, I love that aspect of what you're saying. And thanks for now getting us out of the dark, scary part into the light here. Which is funny, because we're saying that sales is the light, and most people say it's the dark side, but we'll discuss that later in another episode. So I find that if you, in the selling process, have explained to somebody, let's say like you're describing, hey, as part of our agreement, when you do your FDD review, this is what we're committing to do with you, and you highlight the fact that we're going to be on site for the first year, we're going to be there 3 times. For the second year, we're going to be there at least once a year. Like, and if you describe that, even though everybody else might be doing it, if they're not talking about it, it doesn't exist to the candidate. So it becomes a posturing opportunity for you, where you're positioning yourself as the franchisor that's going to be the most engaged. But if you choose to do this and have some commitments in there and execute on those, as we mentioned before, most people aren't making those commitments. So it does become a really powerful sales tool. So I really like that you brought that up, Jeff. Yeah. Well, we just riffed on that one topic for a while, but let's shift gears, shall we? So that was one of 3. So we talked about support, metrics, and communications. Right. Now, communications, we've been kind of talking. If you don't mind, let's shift into that one first, because we've been kind of dancing around it a little bit, around like on-site visits, doing weeklies, stuff like that. Let's break that down more. Like, where have you seen communications become kind of a sticky point or a challenge for franchise systems over the years?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different things, kind of almost like caveats, or things you want to make sure you avoid. One, you can never over communicate. So that means, whether it's by phone or video chat or in-person visits or conferences. Don't avoid the elephant in the room. Don't avoid a franchisee who maybe is not succeeding. Don't avoid franchisees that are not following the system. It's not going to get better by itself. So I think first and foremost, you want to communicate upfront, equally, openly, with all transparency to every single franchisee. Certainly, some are going to, grow faster than others. Some are going to be successful sooner than others. You can hold those folks out as best practices and as success stories, and you really want to have others emulate them. That's great, but don't let the lower performers or slower performers fall off of your radar. That'll cave an emerging brand quicker than anything if you have this kind of have and have not group. So I think the communications, whether it's a weekly newsletter that's a online e-zine, that's what I've seen that's worked very, very well. Either like every other week or monthly town hall, all system type of call. Even if you just have 5 or 10 franchisees, having that type of interval of communication will go a long way. And then plus, as you scale, having that consistency of that same weekly newsletter, monthly call, quarterly updates type of thing will all pay off and help build the consistency of the brand too.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that. Like we do weekly sales meetings here. The reason is we want to make sure that everybody is discussing the same things the same ways, that we're learning about technology changes here.
Right.
It's, constantly evolving technology, which is a nice problem, but we got to stay on top of it or else we're not going to be great consultants, but also I need to make sure that everyone's following the same process. And there's not a better way to make sure you're just reminding people. You pick one process every week, you can cover 52 processes a year. Well, let's do 50 because you got a couple weeks off, but like that's a lot of training and reminding. And if you want to keep people consistent, boy, you better be doing it, or else it's like herding cats. They run to the four corners.
Yeah. And I think we would all agree that every brand in every sector, especially, should be changing and evolving because, as you said, technology is changing. HR practices are changing continually. Labor laws, wages. So there's plenty of change occurring. We want to make sure we keep the franchisees abreast of that change, no matter what our industry is. And again, that's another way to show value add as a franchisor.
Yeah, and let's talk about that last part because the first 90 days where you're helping people get off the ground and they're figuring things out. Like that's really, you feel like the heavy lift as a franchisor, but it's also where there's this part, it's almost where there's a separation emotionally, where then the franchisee about month 4, 5, 6, they start to say, well, I can do this on my own. What do I need you for? And then the rest of your lives, right? The next 20 years, you're justifying your existence to the franchisees and not because you shouldn't, right? Like you really should. They're paying you money. Like what's the licensing, it's the training. But what you just said, people miss this a lot, I see. The franchisors don't recognize the position that they're in. And you as an ops guy probably see this and harness it. But the real power of a franchise system isn't the consistent process in the business plan, isn't the vendor relationships. It's harnessing the collective genius of the different franchise operators. Yeah. And so when you've got this weekly meeting, it's not open up your training manual to page 323. We're going to go through how to plug in your timesheets. No, you can do that if you want. Frankly, you should have an LMS or something that's doing it for you, so you're not wasting human capital retraining. But talk about what's changing about time management laws and make sure everyone's trained on that. Bring in, heaven help you. I mean, easiest thing to do that I've seen work well. People love it when they bring me in, like, Dave, can you do a training on this? And I'll go in there and we'll get them jazzed about how to, do a lead rehash campaign and generate more revenue when lead volumes are down, which is going on right now. And after they're like, wow, that was awesome. And they're like, my franchisees love that. I'm like, why don't you have every one of your suppliers join you on a regular basis and do training? Your HR people, bring them in. Your insurance person, bring in Wade from Rycor. Have them train everybody on how, what's changing in liability, what they should be paying attention to in their coverage. Why not take the pressure off of you, bring in true experts, and now they're getting something they wouldn't be getting. They're not listening to you all day long. So they get a lot more out of it, I think.
Right. I would agree. And that's also back to the value add of the franchisor. So then, because you're right, after the first 4, 5, 6 months, hopefully they're out of the gate strong. You've really immersed yourself into their early success. And then it becomes, what have you done for me lately? And what do I get for my royalties? And just face it, that's going to be your every 2 week or every month challenge for the next X number of years, as long as they're a franchise owner. So I think you're exactly right, Dave. You want to reinforce the value, whether it's through outside speakers, outside expertise, the suppliers, technology, changes in the industry, and you're keeping the franchise owners abreast of all that, or you're kind of the conduit to enable all of that expertise.
Yeah.
That's why they bought into your brand. That's why they're paying you royalties.
Yeah, and talk to us for a minute, because peer-to-peer trainings, we all know, are way better, right? Eventually,
Yes.
you got to surrender the microphone. I mean, if you can get rid of the ego and hand that mic off to somebody else, you tend to have better experiences, and there's people get more out of it. But tell us, how have you leveraged peer-to-peer training versus corporate-led trainings, and what kind of results have you seen from making that shift?
Yes, you're exactly right there too, Dave. The peer-to-peer kind of, example by other franchisees always works best or better than a talking head from the franchisor. Even if the franchisor has a great relationship with the franchisees, great knowledge and experience, you're always going to get much more mileage out of that peer-to-peer approach, where you've got, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, you've got a successful franchisee that maybe does recruiting or does marketing very, very well. And so you have he or she up there, and they're explaining how they use the system, how they utilize the tools, and their success. So I think that is always not only the best practice, but the best approach across the board. Plus, it builds the camaraderie peer-to-peer even more. It can even take an offshoot and become a mentoring opportunity from the larger, more successful franchisees with the newer ones coming in, or maybe less successful. And then it also shows that you, as a franchisor, are not myopic and just so immersed in only your view of things, that you're actually open to sharing the successes that your franchisees have had with each other. You hit on a very important topic. I call it the power of the entrepreneurial network. So you're right, franchisees, that's the power of a successful franchise system, is the franchisee peer-to-peer network interaction, communications. Yes, as a franchisor, you kind of set the guardrails, and you're kind of keeping everything running on the right tracks, but you want those franchisees working together, communicating back and forth. That's the power of a successful brand.
Yeah, you said something there I think is key, because I've been involved in some of these meetings, and I've seen a franchise owner kind of go off the rails, or like, well, I'm doing this instead of that, and it's working better. So you're an ops guy. How do you build some safety net, or some maybe guardrails around that process, so people don't lead people astray off of the proven process before you? Sometimes you got to change, right? Sometimes you adapt processes, but you don't want the revelation of a process adaptation to come from a peer-to-peer training that you've highlighted and set up in these meetings. So how do you put some safeguards around that?
Yeah, there's two things that I've always done that I think are most effective, Dave. One is I'll kind of plant seeds ahead of the session. So I take my one or two strongest operators that I know are going to be in the session. Hopefully, they're the ones that are in some way presenting it. But even if there's one or two others that are not part of the franchisees presenting, I want to try to mention to them, hey, as a reminder, if we have anybody speak up, would you please step forward and reiterate your view on this topic? So I'm not dictating, I'm not mandating, I'm not putting words in their mouth. Then that way, when that franchisee steps up and asks a question or has a comment that is off the rails, off the reservation, not part of the system, one of their own peers steps forward and answers their question, or gives them the response, and not us as a franchisor. So then we don't come across as being heavy-handed. Again, it takes some work, takes some relationship building that you hopefully already have with your stronger, more established franchisees. And end of the day, the franchisees want a strong brand, and we're only as strong as our weakest link, or only as strong as our weakest franchisee. So I think the stronger, more established franchisees, they want to help that weaker franchisee come along, and they want to bring him or her along, so they get into the fold and make the brand stronger too.
Yeah, I love that. And I think seeding the ideas, prepping people for that, and also, frankly, just knowing who your experts are, because worst case, right, if they don't chime in, let's say they're not paying attention for that part of the Zoom meeting, so like, yeah, I know this. you also know who to call and be like, hey, Steve, I know that you've certainly come across this a number of times. How would you recommend taking care of that? I know in Charlotte you do it a little bit differently than they do it in Tallahassee, but you mind sharing how
Yes.
you tackle that? I mean, it's better when they organically raise their hand to help out, but boy, being able to call people out in those meetings and let them, then you facilitate the knowledge transfer. That I think that's a really good fail safe if they're not raising their hand themselves.
Oh yeah, I would agree. And that's back to, if you know your franchisees well enough, you've communicated well, you've had solid support, they know their metrics, you've helped educate them on their metrics. And then yes, to call out Steve, or to ask Steve or ask Mary if she could share her experience back with John, who just kind of gave a off the rails comment or question. You're right.
Yeah, I agree. Cool. So you said there were two things. One, you seed ideas, and I cut you off, so you didn't get to the second one. This is to ensure you have a good, like, peer-to-peer training environment.
Yeah, that's the second one. There is actually building more of a formal mentor program to where you do have the peer-to-peer network at kind of a second level, and it's starting early to where it helps those new franchisees coming in, Dave, better understand and better see the path to follow from a successful owner. And it's not just everything that you as the franchisor are saying, that successful owner is able to back it up too.
Yeah, and how do you do that? Because that does require time from your franchisor or franchisees that are already operating a business. How do you get them to buy into a concept like that?
Yeah, that is definitely a tougher challenge. I think there's two pieces to that too, because I've seen it work where there's slight compensation, because you don't want to get too carried away there. You could then you could get accused of, you're paying for what that mentor is telling the mentoree. But I think it is something where you set up that mentor franchisee as being kind of either a certified franchisee, certified franchise training mentor. So you could title he or she a couple different ways. And then you're just rewarding them. It could be something other than monetary. It could be with recognition at the conference. They have a special band on their name tag, or they have a flag, or there's a special reception where just the mentoring franchisees are in there. So I think it doesn't have to be monetary compensation. It can be recognition and acclaim.
Yeah, I know some that do. If they're in an industry where they're consuming, they'll provide a discount on the corporate, the whatever materials you're going to. If you're a mentor, we'll give you 10% off on all the stuff you got to buy. That can tally up fast. Or in a royalty-driven environment, which y'all are in, they're saying, hey, for anyone who's in the mentorship program, we're giving you half a point off of your royalties for the duration of the time you're a mentor.
Right.
Sometimes that can become I'm not saying you need to use that number. Don't get caught up on that.
Yeah.
I'm saying, like, that kind of a structure, that's appealing, and if I'm doing $100,000 a month and I can shave off 1 point, then you're essentially, it's not that you're paying me $1,000, I'm saving that off my bottom line and putting that cash in the bank. It's usually a pretty equitable exchange for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a month of effort. So you just have to do some math, like, what is their time worth, and make sure that you've got something that's valuable. Because and also the recognition side, you can't underestimate that. In some ecosystems like teachers, they actually value recognition and awards more than monetary compensation.
Yes.
So you find the balance there. I think you're smart to bring that one up too. Cool. Well, what's sad is we've talked about metrics circumspectly, right, as being kind of the root of how we have to identify how to coach people, things like that. I know it's time to wrap up, but do you mind, maybe, Jeff, share some parting insights about how critical are metrics in supporting the rest of the topics we discussed today?
Yeah, I think metrics are vital, Dave. It's really what drives unit profitability, which we should all be holding unit profitability as our number one goal all the time. Because if the franchisees are successful and profitable, we as a franchisor are going to be fine. So core metrics, we need to make sure we have a scorecard the franchisee looks at. You as a franchisor should have your own scorecard too, that you're tracking the system owner by owner. That's how you should be tracking unit profitability too, owner by owner. But come up with what your key operating guide points are. So, like for us in the home care industry, Hours per week of care is a big metric. Caregiver turnover is a big metric. Caregiver retention is a big metric. Our close ratios of when we're in the home doing an in-home assessment up front, how often does that result in an actual signed service agreement? So just, it doesn't have to be really complicated. In fact, I'm a big believer that simpler is better.
Yeah.
So you're just trying to create those core metrics and then also the new franchisee and his or her staff should hear and see those core metrics throughout their initial training as well.
Yeah, because it gives them the measuring stick, right? They should be working toward those things. Otherwise, if you have nothing to aim at, you're sure to hit the mark, right?
That's right. Yeah. And then of course, make sure that just a core business plan is in everybody's automatic bucket right from the start, because you want that annual business plan to be a big guide you're going to circle back to for support and operational guidance as well as metrics.
Yeah, I agree. That's fantastic advice. And Jeff, I wish we had another 20 minutes. Although, I think that we should maybe get together another time and dive deeper into the metric side of things. But thank you for covering such an important topic today of operational excellence and how to focus on support properly, how to focus on communication properly, and then even metrics that kind of tie it all together. I feel like we did talk about metrics in multiple stages there, but this has been fantastic. Thanks for sharing so many insights.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.